In 1980, TSR published a module that was different from its other Dungeons & Dragons adventures. This adventure blurred the lines of fantasy and science fiction. Warriors and wizards would fight robots and discover high-tech weapons and armor on their expedition. But was this breaking the game? Did science fiction have a place in our fantasy adventures? I'm joined by Michael Curtis of Goodman Games, who rewrote this classic for 5th edition and the original Adventures Reincarnated line. We're talking about none other than S3, Expedition to the Barrier Peaks, today on the Old Men Rolling Dice podcast. Old Men Rolling Dice is sponsored by CanadianDice.ca. Don't forget to use our code OMRD for 15% off your entire order at checkout. I'm joined by Michael Curtis today, RPG writer, author for DCC. Is there other stuff I should mention, Michael? What is your tagline?
I am currently, my full-time job is I am the director of product development for Dungeon Crawl Classics and associated lines at Goodman Games. That's my job title these days. That comes after about 15 years of freelancing for Joe Goodman. So yes, I wore a lot of hats between when I first started in 2008 and where I am now. So
yeah, sure, definitely experience. And as I will have mentioned in the forward, we're talking about Expedition to the Barrier Peaks today. I will say this, I've played D&D a long time. I've never run the module itself. So I'm at a loss in that, and I've never played in it, but I have always, it's always been on my bookshelf. I've owned it for a very long time. My curiosity was piqued about it. But this is what happens every time I try to talk to someone. It's either a love or hate relationship with Expedition to the Barrier Peaks. There's never any sort of middle ground. So what's your feeling on that? I think I know where you're going to come down, but are you a fan of mixing sort of science fiction with fantasy?
Well, here's my thing is that I come from a literature for the English background, and once upon a time there were two forms of long fiction, and that was the novel and the romance. And the novel was anything that was realistic and took place in current society, and the romance was anything that didn't. So by the very strict, if you go by those guidelines, any sort of shenanigans, any sort of whether you want to call it science fiction, if you want to call it fantasy, you want to call it space opera, fairy tales, basically, even like the techno thriller at a certain point, all of that is a romance. So to me, it's really difficult to blur the lines between I think that any sort of genre that we determine whether we're going to call it science fiction or fantasy or whatever is basically a creation by publishing houses to sell books. So I really don't have any issue with blending those lines in between. I know people dislike it, but my question to them is if you don't like fantasy in your science fiction or science fiction in your fantasy, ask yourself this question: what do you think about Star Wars? Are you a fan of Star Wars?
Exactly. Yeah.
Because Star Wars is just basically more of a space opera. It's it's science fiction with a lot of fantasy tropes and vice versa. So I think people are more open to it than they allow themselves to admit. So as I said, I'm a fan. I anything that is interesting and creative, something that I haven't seen a dozen times before, I'm all for.
I would even go so far as to wonder if Star Wars didn't have a little bit of a hand to play in this module as it developed over time. I know that originally it was, you might know this better than me, but originally it was for not Gamma World. It was a game that came before Gamma.
Metamorphosis Alpha.
That's it. Yes.
Metamorphosis Alpha was the first. It was built as the first science fantasy role playing game. It wasn't even called a science fiction game, and that was Jim Ward's basically his home campaign, which came up with the idea of a generational starship which had gone off course and had been exposed to cosmic storms whatsoever, and there was massive radiation on it. So to the point where the player characters did not even know they were on a spaceship. Because the spaceship was gigantic, like miles long, so you could wander around, and only through exploration did they discover that there's something more than what I'm going on, more than the reason you can't go over that hill is because there's a duralloy wall you can't get through.
Yeah, yeah.
So that's kind of where it came from, and then that was Jim Ward's original brainchild, and then I think what I think it was is that either I don't remember exact details. I think that originally there was some idea of maybe Expedition to Barrier Peaks was designed to kind of help promote Metamorphosis Alpha because
Yeah, I think
like
so too.
many of those old TSR modules, it began life as a tournament. It was a tournament
Mhm.
modules. It was just
Of
just be
course.
run at whatever time slot they were using back then, and then of course Metamorphosis Alpha kind of died on the vine when Gamma World came along. So if although it was probably inspired by this, I think the inspiration and just kind of like the paths diverge after a while.
Certainly. So, what was it difficult for those that don't know? I think I brought this up already with it being rewritten by Goodman Games for 5th edition. Was it a difficult rewrite? Like,
Not
was it difficult to convert?
Not really. I mean, it was this was the third original Adventures Reincarnated line that we had done. So
Mhm.
I wasn't involved in the first two. So I think I wrote a pair of like essays for it. Really, but by the time we did the third one, luckily Chris Doyle had did the two before then.
Yeah.
So I was kind of go for him and get like what what's the process here? How do we do this and everything? He gave me a lot of advice, and it was really easy. The advice started is like get a PDF of the original that you can cut and paste, and and that's so that so I didn't have to rewrite everything by hand. It was a lot of just cutting things from the legal PDF and then just putting into Word and then starting rearranging things. It's really just a matter of trying to bring stuff that was written in 1970 whatever. I don't remember that when the original I think it was published in the 80s, but I think it stems back to the 70s.
I think the original like tournament adventure was in the 70s, and
Yeah.
I think maybe the form that people are used to seeing, I think, wasn't brought out until the 80s.
Yeah, it was probably
1980s,
I want to say like
somewhere around there.
82 or 81 or 82 or something
Yep.
like that.
Yeah.
But it was just a matter of kind of like adjusting that and bringing it into kind of what the public has their expectations of when they now buy a game, a game product now compared to in 1970 whatever, because obviously back then it was the Wild West. We didn't really know what they were doing. They didn't really have, I mean, I think the original setting of the Hill Giant is 8 pages. I mean,
Yeah, exactly.
so you couldn't sell an 8-page module these days.
No,
So,
the difference, yeah, that's more of a zine culture when you're getting down into like 8 and 10 page products. Now you're like that's like sort of private publishing and that, but the difference between a module then and now is crazy. I mean, 24 pages back in the day was considered a pretty standard
right.
module, and now 100 pages. I know that some go even higher. There are a lot of maps for this particular, a lot of different levels for the ship. And you mentioned that in the sort of the in Jim Ward's Metamorphosis Alpha that the players didn't really know it was a ship. That's sort of the intention here as well.
Yes, yeah, that was it was supposed to be a surprise. Obviously,
Yeah.
In fact, even though it is a science fiction, a high technological adventure, if you take a look at the artifacts that can be discovered on the ship, a lot of them are purposely designed to look really weird. Like I think like I remember called the laser cannon is something that like folds off of your arm and it comes up over the back of your shoulder or something.
Yes.
Was one thing if you're describing it, if you're a player, you think, oh, that's obviously some sort of like flashlight or something like that, because it does not look like what you picture, as
That's right.
some sort of weapon and everything. And that was Gary being, both cunning and a bit of a wise ass too. So
obviously intentional, and so that people didn't know what the heck they were dealing with.
Right. I think like the healing spray actually looks like a grenade. It doesn't, if you look at it, things like this, like it's clearly like he's going to start describing this. And you're like, oh, I know what this is. And you're like, no, you actually don't.
No, you don't have any clue. You don't have any clue. Do you have a favorite encounter from the module? Is there something that sort of sticks out? And I also wonder, like, because you also wrote Frozen in Time, which is a great first level DCC adventure, which has some similarities in that these sort of prehistoric people are finding high tech devices. Was there something that stuck out from Barrier Peaks that like tickled your fancy or was a favorite?
Well, I mean, I've always kind of liked the blending of the genres anyway, as I said, and definitely Frozen in Time was definitely me doing the Dungeon Crawl Classics version of, Expedition to the Barrier Peaks, but, rather than a crashed spaceship, it's the evil lair of a time traveler who has been stealing stuff from all up and down the time stream. And, But yeah, there's definitely, you can find, I mean, there's a robot and there's a dinosaur and there's a laser gun and all the rest of it, so all the fun stuff to play with. The encounters in the original that I love the most are some of the smaller ones, and I find that the lower you get on the ship, the more interesting they are, and whether that's by design or just luck. But I mean, I love, there's the androids who are basically in the gym, and if you go in there and like there's nothing like an android beating you to death with a barbell, and
I think you can even like convince the karate one that the boxing robot is better or something.
There's a karate robot. I think there's a fencing robot, and there's like a weightlifting robot, and and they. So I think when I've run into one, like at least once I've run it, so like the for gamers of a certain age, I ran it so like the weightlifting robot was one of Hans and Franz from the Saturday Night Live. So.
That's great. I really like the one that sticks out to me is I think it's called the wolf in sheep's clothing. It's like the mutant plant, but it has like a rabbit for bait. Do you know the one?
Yes. It's actually a monster, and it has like a vestigial limb which looks like a bunny.
Yeah,
and so if you get close enough to it, like, oh, it's just a bunny on that, and then like tentacles will erupt from the ground and grab you and like bite your head off, and that's a classic, to the point that it got reprinted in the Monster Manual too. I think that's a lot of people like came across it like, what the heck is this? It's like Harry, what are you thinking?
I remember not being very old and looking at that monster and thinking, what the heck is this about? In the ship, though, I think there's rabbits running all over the ship at one point, or little rabbit-like creatures. So this just sort of fits in as bait or something for the
thing, there's the garden level, which is, I think it's like the third level on the ship, if I remember. It's either the third or fourth level of it, but that's where all like the crazy like zoo animals that have been changed, and all the plant life is all lethal. So that's definitely in there.
There's a lot of sort of angry plants in Barrier Peaks. There's and even mold and fungus that attack you. I'm not sure what Gary's obsession with that was, but the garden is not safe.
Well, I mean, the entire upper level is like rival tribes of the Vegapygmies. They're basically like little plant life people. The plant like humanoids who are running around all over the place. So I think probably there was some sort of like stab at Gygaxian naturalism. Like he wanted to kind of justify the fact that if this thing has been like buried, under a landslide or something, that, there has to be something that could subsist without like, hunting, if you have a very close ecosystem. So it's always easy to have like something that just exists on like the natural, like, the artificial light and, and water that is available on the ship. So you get a lot of that stuff. And then that gives you the basis. You can have other things eat those plants, and then, you close the ecosystem. So it's kind of like a nudge nod there. This all makes sense, really. It's not, so
yeah, exactly. Hey, it's DM Jeremy, and if you like old school D&D and TTRPG games, then I invite you to follow us on our socials. Come check out Old Men Rolling Dice on Instagram or Facebook and join in on our discussions there. Can't wait to chat with you. Do you think that Expedition to the Barrier Peaks is a better DCC scenario? Like, could it be played as DCC, or, I mean, MCC seems an obvious fit for it. Any thoughts on that? Like, I feel like the fun of DCC and the randomness works well here.
Well, see, here's my thing. Is that I am kind of on record that I don't think the DCC, despite its name, is really good for long dungeon crawls. I very much come from the school of thought that it should be like the old kind of episodic novels, that would draw all the explorations, influence on, like, I mean, I'm a huge Liber fan, and it was always there's like one novel and everything else is a short story, and Fafhrd and Grey Mouse are going from place to place and everything. So the idea of just like an ongoing campaign where you're just spending like 6 months just like exploring the same location over and over again, that's the antithesis of fun for me. And especially Expedition of the Barrier Peaks it's a product of its time in a lot of ways. I mean, the upper level of it is just nothing but empty room after empty room after empty room after empty, which is great if it's 1970 whatever, and it's a tournament and you have like X amount of hours, you have like 4 hours to score as many points as possible. And if you get bogged down opening every empty room, like, you're obviously not going to score very high, which is one of the reasons I put a sidebar literally in the rewrite saying like, like, don't do this. It's just like sum up, like, like the GM, the DM should just say like, yeah, after exploring this bank of 10 empty rooms, you come across a door which is closed, and that's where the fun stuff is. Because I mean.
I think you're psychic, because that's where I was headed. I was going to say, if you were to GM this now, do you think there's any pitfalls? So obviously the large number of empty rooms,
right?
Figure out a way to navigate around them, etc.
So I said the other thing that as written, especially in the Barrier Peaks, it doesn't have any sort of central through line. Like the introduction to it is these like keeps out on like the border of the settled land have been attacked and leveled and stuff. So in the tournament setup, you get set up to go investigate. But there's actually nothing in the original module which talks about that whatsoever. It's literally like there's no like orchestrated action or anything. The idea is that I guess Gary's idea is monsters are occasionally leaving the ship and just like wandering around and destroying things. But there's no like through plot through it, which is one of the things
there's not like a hook to really.
No, there's not. So that's one of the things that I had to introduce in the bonus material when we did the conversion of it. Like, we added a new level, and there is basically a colonization. Androids are kind of been let loose from the ship, and they're basically trying to loosely kind of terraform the planet. They're trying to basically conquer the entire place. So, the idea is you discover the army and you realize you can't take them on, but then you figure out where they're coming from, and then you can go in there and you can basically shut down like the main computer, which is controlling them all. So it gives you some sort of set goal of it, rather than just wandering from empty room until you get attacked by venture pygmies and you kill them with a flashlight. So
yeah, I actually find that in a lot of earlier modules, and again, I think a product of its time. There's not. It was really left up to the DM to hook the players into a reason to go there. It was just sort of like, this is what's there. Now you figure out why they're there.
Right. I mean, I have nothing against emergent gameplay, like the story kind of coming out, but since we were converting this for 5th edition with the intention of people who are used to playing 5th edition playing this, that wouldn't fly, because people would be asking like, why am I doing this? Why is this going on? What's the goal of this? So we had to that's one of the things we had to insert, because the difference of playing it in, 2018, I guess, or whenever it came out, before the world changed anyway. And then compared to doing it in 1981, 1982, that's it.
So many new gamers have come into the hobby. And I think you're right that they don't, sort of the 1970s, 1980s way of gaming is not necessarily still utilized.
The other interesting thing about the technology is we had a discussion about the technology before we kind of overtook the process of it, and there was a decision of like, all right, so this was written in 1970 whatever, and it was kind of like trying to predict where technology would be in the future. And if you look at it now, it's damn laughable. I mean, that's no fault on Gary. So we said like, okay, do we update it now and try to imagine where technology is going to be 20, 50 years from now? But then the more we looked at it, we decided that actually a retro future thing worked the best, because at one point there's microfilm readers in the ship library, and with the whole idea was like, should we update them? I said, no, leave those as those are, because again, if you're somebody who's just discovering 5e, if you're 18 years old, if you're 20 years old or anything, like, chances are you have no idea what a microfilm reader is, what it looks like.
That's very true.
Like that. So to you, that's futuristic technology. You can describe that as it is, and you're like, I don't know what this thing is. Maybe it's some sort of periscope. So we purposely left all like the technology, retro in that sense. So like the computers are being clunky, and
I was talking to someone recently who didn't know what a cassette was, and I was like, oh dear, I've reached that age. I think it was Dragon Magazine ranked this as like number 5 of the best modules of all time.
Yeah, it was Dungeon. I think it was Dungeon Magazine. They released the list of 20 top adventures not too long before Dungeon shuttered. I think it was like maybe like the third to last issue or something like that. I think so.
Do you think it deserves that high praise? Like number 5 is pretty high on the list.
It is, and it's one of those things that I think it does. See, so here's the thing: is it kind of suffers from what I call Jimi Hendrix syndrome, and that is that anybody who has played, like Jimi Hendrix is considered one of the great guitarists of all time. So
absolutely,
there's no argument about that.
Absolutely.
But anybody who's been playing guitar for 6 months can play it like, at least like hammer out like a bit of a Hendrix song and everything.
Sure.
But the idea is just like, yeah, but Jimmy did it first. I think that's the reason why Expedition of the Barrier. I know I aped it, first in time, but that was the first one, who was showing that, yeah, this is not just all Tolkien. It's not all, it's not all Jack Vance or anything. You can cross the streams. The barrier in between science fiction, fantasy is permeable. Feel free to cross anything and just take all those great ideas and just, put them all together. And that was so, in that sense, it became like a beacon. It came out like an object lesson. You can do this. So for that, I do think it definitely belongs on that list of all time. I don't remember like what 4 through 1 is, but
no, I don't remember either. But when I was just doing a bit of background research about the module and that, I saw it ranked number 5, and I'm like, okay, that's legit. That's very high.
I would say if I said, maybe even if I don't agree, maybe necessarily on 5, I would definitely it belongs in the top 10.
Michael, thank you so much for being here with me today, and I really appreciate the chat and the time. Old Men Rolling Dice is sponsored by CanadianDice.ca. Don't forget to use our code OMRD for 15% off your entire order at checkout.